Guys, welcome to another video and another video. You've got Mr. Everything English, and today I am addressing something that I think I should have addressed a long time ago. Sometimes we get lost, right? We talk about writing essays and how many paragraphs per essay and what quote to use and so on. But something where a lot of students struggle at is starting their essay. How do you get going? And it's not even that. Once they get going, how do they know that their start is a good start? Now guys, for English language, you're not necessarily marked on the quality of your point. However, for English literature, when it comes to A01, you are marked on the quality of your point. So you need to make sure that three things: your point is correct. So for example, if you're going to say that Macbeth is a violent man, you better be sure he's violent. Number two, it needs to be detailed. And number three, it needs to be personal. Every kid up and down the country is going to say that Macbeth is violent, that Romeo is weak. These are generic points. How do you turn these generic points into complex points that you can use from your exam? Guys, in this video, I'm going to go through step by step how to write the perfect point, how to write a beautiful point for your exam. Because once you know how to start, naturally, if you've done your revision and learnt your quotes, everything else should fit nicely. So guys, in this video, we're going to go over how to write a point, and a grade 9 quality point. And I really mean it, guys. For those of you aiming for a grade 7, 8 and 9, your paragraphs, paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3 and paragraph 4 for an English literature essay needs to be consistent. Meaning each paragraph has to have a good point, a good quote, a good technique, a good explanation. But for now, let's address the elephant in the room. Let's get the point out of the way, and hopefully none of you guys will ever message me saying, "Sir, I don't know how to start a paragraph." Let's begin. Guys, when it comes to some of the key ingredients about how to write a grade 9 point, there are just a few things that we need to include. The first thing you want to start with is you want to begin with the very basic point. You don't want to complicate it from the very beginning. All you want to start with, guys, is a very basic point which you then explain. Now you might be thinking, "Sir, what does that mean?" I'll explain what I mean when I begin giving you guys my example. But you start with a very basic point. Then guys, after you've given your point, you give your location, you give your where. Now what do I mean by this? You want to show the examiner that you know where what you're talking about is in your text. So for example, if you're going to say that Mr. Burling is a powerful man, tell me the act, give me the location. Because by giving the location, guys, you already raise the quality by making the examiner aware that you know that text pretty well. The next thing, guys, after you've given a very basic point that you've explained, and after you've given your where, then you want to sprinkle. Now, what are we sprinkling? We are sprinkling context. However, we're not sprinkling context by explaining. Sprinkle just a touch. And all we're doing, guys, is we're dropping keywords. That's all we're doing. We're dropping keywords. Words like patriarchy, words like capitalism, words like socialism, words like religion. We're just going to drop these words in our point to show the examiner that we have awareness and wider awareness. The reason, guys, we're sprinkling is because later in the text, guys, is when we are going to link our context in a much more detail, much more thoroughly. But in our point, we just want to sprinkle. Next one, guys, the question. I beg you. Please make sure your point answers the question. Don't just give random points that you've heard from videos on YouTube or from books you've read or from teachers in your classroom. Those are points in general. But look at your question and look at it closely and come up with specific points in regards to your question. And the last thing, guys, reference. Whatever point you are going to use, guys, whatever point you are going to use, you better be able to back it up. I say it to my year 11s all the time when their hand goes up and they say to me, sir, I can't explain my quote and I can't link my point to my quote. Why did you bother choosing that quote? Why did you bother choosing that point? So for example, if your point is that Macbeth is presented as a violent man, but you don't know any quotes about how Macbeth is violent, then don't do that point. Now, in an ideal world, yes, you've learned and you've watched my videos on the top 10 quotes, and then you're able to apply them to lots of different scenarios. However, that's in an ideal world. So guys, all I'm saying is whatever point you pick, please make sure you're confident enough to discuss. Now, the quality, guys, of your point, right, it comes down to one important thing. How well do you know your text? And it genuinely does come down to that. You find, right, those students who don't really understand the books because they've not put in the work, they've not been revising, they give you basic points. They give you catchphrases and keywords that they hear other people use. But those students who've spent time knuckling down and really going through those texts, they are the ones that are able to come up with the most detailed and the most reflective and the most perceptive points because they put in the work. They understand the text inside out. So, guys, these are a few of the things that I would like you all to be doing when it comes to how do you write a very good point. But this sounds very, very nice. But practically, how does it look like? Practically. I'm going to show you guys a nice, clean example. Let's pick the text, guys. Let's pick the text and Inspector Calls. And imagine the question, guys, in your exam was, how is the character of Mr. Burling presented? And your point, remember, we start with the very basic point. Mr. Burling is presented as a greedy character. Okay, now, is my point correct? Is what I've said correct? Yes, it's correct 1000%. However, it's a terrible point. There's no perception, there's no inference, there's no detail. It's just me giving you a bog standard point that every kid up and down the country is gonna make. Mr. Burling is a greedy man. Terrible point. It's correct. However, it's not a grade 9 point. It's probably not even a grade 5 point. Remember, guys, next thing, let's add a location. Step 2. In Act 1 of An Inspector Calls, Mr. Burling is presented as greedy. Okay, now I've made it slightly better. It's still pretty weak, but I've made it slightly better. I've given the examiner, I've given the reader a little bit of location. I've told them where in my text I'm going to be finding my point from. So I've got the where, I've got the basic point. Now, the third part, guys, now let's explain my point. Slightly, not a lot, just slightly. Let's explain what I mean when I say that he's greedy. All right, guys, step number 3. In An Inspector Calls, Mr. Burling. Now we're gonna get rid of the word greedy. The word greedy is a very basic choice of vocabulary. Mr. Burling, but I'm gonna explain how he's greedy. Mr. Burling is a character who is obsessed with himself. He only does what is in his benefit. All right, much better. Now I've told the reader what I mean when I say he's greedy, but I haven't used the word greedy. In Inspector Calls, Mr. Burling is a character who's obsessed with himself. He only does what is in his benefit. Now we're going to sprinkle a little bit of context, just a tiny bit. This is reflective of his capitalist ideology. This is reflective of his capitalist ideology. Now guys, capitalism was the belief that we only care about ourselves, that our only concern and our primary concern is us. It links perfectly to my point, but I'm just going to mention it. I'm just going to chuck in the word capitalism and I'm going to move on, and I'll come back to it when I explain the effect of my quote. This is reflective of his capitalist ideology and is evident when he instructs Eric to, and then I will introduce my quote. Now guys, it is always important to introduce your evidence. Don't just put a quote after a full stop. Always introduce, always embed your quote. But that's not what we're here for, guys. We're not here to talk about quotes or effect or anything. We are sticking to our point. Guys, look at the step by step. I came up with a very basic point. Mr. Burling is greedy. I then gave my point a location. Where in the play is he greedy? You can even take it further, and if you know it, zoom into the precise moment when the inspector arrives or when he's talking to Eric and Gerald, if you want to go that far. Third step, you go back to your basic point and you explain what you mean. So I explained what I meant when he was greedy. In the Inspector Calls, Mr. Burling is a character who's obsessed with himself. He only does what is in his benefit. Then I sprinkle a tiny bit of context. This is reflective of his capitalist ideology, and then I jump to my reference. It's just a point, I don't want to take too long. And it's evident when he instructs Eric to, and then my quote comes. Now, for you to be able to write a point like this is determined by a few factors. Number one, you can only sprinkle context if you know context. If you don't know any context, go and learn your context. You can only add location in Act 1. Where is it? Guys, I took it out. It should be here, guys, in Act 1 of an Inspector Calls. Chucked it in there, guys, so you give your location. And guys, the next step, you can't be doing this step-by-step guide in your exam. This is the revision, this is the practice that you do now. So you think of lots of different ways characters are presented, themes are presented. In in Macbeth, Macbeth is presented as a violent man. Basic point. Think of, okay, how can I explain that to make it better? Where can I find my location? Where in the text is he really, really violent? Is there any context I can link to that? Yes, there is. Patriarchy, and how men were supposed to be strong and brave and powerful. Those are the thought process, guys, that you should be going through. But guys, here you have it, guys. Here is a clear way to create a grade 9 point for your exam. Do that 4 times at the start of each of your 4 paragraphs and you will do perfect. Now this is just about the point, how to get your exam started. Don't forget what comes next, guys. You have your reference. Then you find a technique in your reference. Then you explain the effect of that technique. Then you zoom in to your quote. Then you explain the effect of that zooming in. Everything ultimately though goes back and is linked to your point to ensure you are on task. Alright guys, I hope you never get stuck on how to start a essay ever again and how to start a paragraph. You will though need to go and practice this. Guys, you will need to go and practice. Find lots of basic points and really go step by step, just the way I did. And the more you do it, the easier it will get. And hopefully by the time you sit your exam, you will do perfect. Alright guys, I'll end the video here. It's been Mr. Everything English. Peace.